Welcome to Mixed Media Live. I'm glad to be here. We made it. We're actually streaming off of my phone's 4G LTE. We'll see how well this works. I'm anticipating maybe some lag spikes or things like that, but my apartment's Wi-Fi went out because we can't have good, consistent streams on Mixed Media for whatever reason. But yeah, I'm excited about today. We've got an all Star Wars episode. We're coming at it from the music, the gaming, and the film and TV perspectives. And I think it'll be interesting to hear all our different topics that center around vague concept around power. I just thought it was a really cool title, Power, a Star Wars Story. Hopefully got your attention. So without further ado, Ben, you want to introduce yourself and what topic you'll be talking about?
Sure. I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flutist and media composer, and I will be discussing some of Kevin Kiner's music to the various Star Wars animated series, Clone Wars, Rebels, and the upcoming Bad Batch.
Cool. And Nathan?
Hi. Yeah, okay. So I am a programmer and video game designer, currently working on 2 video games and also starting to learn how to compose. Yeah, that's pretty much me.
Cool. And my name is Irving. I am a filmmaker, media entrepreneur. I do all kinds of things. I own my own production/media company called Ariella Productions. And yeah, I'll be talking about a lot of things regarding Lucasfilm with regards to its TV offerings, its film offerings, but kind of centering around The Last Jedi as a case study, because I think that was a big turning point. And there's a lot of interesting things to talk about from a creative and sort of behind the scenes perspective. So that's what I'll be talking about. Cool. So have you guys been doing anything interesting lately?
Just working on a game, I guess. Oh yeah. Oh, I forgot. I'm also a 3D modeler. Yeah, I saw that on my subtitle. That is a thing that I do. Yeah.
Yeah. You, Ben? Do anything interesting lately?
I don't know. I can't. I feel like I have something, but it's like I'm not thinking of what I want to say. I don't know. But I just generally listening to a lot of music. I've been listening to a lot of Schumann this week for some reason. Not film at all, but interesting composer.
Yeah, music is music. Music is art. So that's cool.
Actually, I went and listened to the Chevelle album again, the new one, and it was really good. I listened to it like 5 other times again. I was like, wow, this is actually better than I thought on the first listen.
Just some housekeeping stuff before we continue on. I hope you guys appreciate, those of you who are watching either live or in the future, appreciate the new layout that we're slowly building on. What we've been doing, that our quality is slowly increasing. Ben's got his professional mic mic'd up. I've added compression and done some EQ stuff to my mic because I was bothered by it last time, and it's this Rode video mic right here. And Nathan's got a mic on the way. So we're making good incremental changes, and all we would ask in return for all the beautiful hard work that we put in is that you hit the like button, or you subscribe if you're on YouTube, or follow us if you're on Twitch. We love doing these things, and there's nothing that would encourage us more than, growing our audience. And if you could share these videos too, that'd be amazing. I'll just jump into my topic then. And that is mostly about The Last Jedi. But I'll give you a couple of backgrounds steps about both my relationship to Star Wars and what went into creating the new trilogy, what went into the buyout of Lucasfilms, etc. Personally, I'm not a native Star Wars fan. I'm not I'm not super crazy about the original films. In fact, if I probably wouldn't think about it so much if it weren't so big in pop culture. And I'm just gonna say this in advance. If I say something that sounds like blasphemy to the Star Wars community, it probably is, and it doesn't bother me either. So
I'll probably point it out too.
If I mention ideas that are not really in the Star Wars sort of breadth of ideas, it's because I'm coming at it from a purely filmmaker perspective, from a purely, I don't know what's happening in the extended universe. I have no clue about any of that stuff. So I'm just going to talk about it from that perspective. You guys can feel free to disagree, and you guys should comment your disagreements. But yeah, so without further ado, everyone pretty much knows that Lucasfilm was bought out by Disney. And also, you should know that if you've been around mixed media for any length of time, that I'm not a Disney fan, and I don't think anyone here is particularly fans of Disney. I think they're epitome of gigantic big corporation that does not a single thing about art, and not a single thing about the human spirit. And I'm willing to call them out for all their BS, including when it comes to Star Wars, because I might not be a fan, but there's a lot of BS when it comes to Star Wars. So yeah, basically, George Lucas, he cited his reasons for selling off Disney. I'm not well read on the subject. I know he's done many interviews and whatever, but from what I've seen, he decided to sell Lucasfilm to Disney because he was just simply getting old and getting tired of it. At least that's what I saw. Running a company, he's been running Lucasfilm for a long time, and in fact, he's responsible for a lot of innovations in the film space on a production side. A lot of people think about him as a universe creator, and some people think that he's a director. He's not really a good director at all. He's mostly relied on other creatives to help bring about his visions, which is fine. But he takes a more he sort of lights up a lot better when he's in the sort of producer role. You can tell this through his essentially creating like VFX as we know it in the film world through Industrial Light and Magic, otherwise known as ILM, which gets its hands in pretty much every major blockbuster movie. So yeah, George Lucas is a pretty big deal in the film world on like a production level, especially. Not to mention that he's, a universe creator as well, which is a big deal.
Yeah, I one other thing to add to why he sold it. At the time, he commented that he's really interested in having a family, and his daughter was born. I think she's 6 or 7 now, so she was born shortly after he sold it. So that's also another factor in why he decided to sell it.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seems like a common reason, and I definitely sympathize with that. What has he been doing, actually? Do you know, Ben, since he sold the company?
As far as I know, he was actually at our graduation.
Oh, right, yeah, but other than that.
Yeah, but what has he done? He's mostly just been kind of like lying fairly low, spending time with his family, and he apparently does a lot of work like in his own home studio on really small projects that are like for him alone, in addition to like giving and like sharing those resources with local high school students.
I know that he knew Kathleen Kennedy, a prominent producer through Steven Spielberg, and so she had been sort of his friend, her friend. She had been his friend for a little while, and so she ended up taking over the company in his stead, and thus took over for this impending new Star Wars trilogy that, let's be honest, was bound to happen no matter what, because it was too ripe for for the picking. And once Disney owned the rights to Star Wars, they were not going to not make a new trilogy? Why make new things when you can look at the data of the past and just remake them? Why not? Or essentially remake them. But I'll talk about the artistic qualities of the films in a moment. She doesn't really hide that she's a big personality, and she hires other big personalities to assist in production. So immediately when they started talking creative about creating a new trilogy, she immediately brought on people who essentially would, if not think in the same vein that she does about everything, people who would at least listen to her and do exactly what she says if she were to impose her will over any Star Wars product. That's putting it very lightly, by the way. And so she ended up bringing on a known Star Wars fan early on, which is J.J. Abrams. And the interesting thing about J.J. is that he's been on the record for a long time saying that he wanted to direct a Star Wars film. And he's a self-described gigantic Star Wars fan. Now, I know a lot of people will say, but wait, blah, 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 blah. But I think the story is a little bit more complicated. And so J.J. Abrams' role in the whole thing is a little bit more complicated than I think people give credit. In fact, even since he was directing Star Trek, the Star Trek trilogy, which I'm, again, not a Star Trek fan, so people might think I'm blaspheming by saying that I actually enjoy the second film of that trilogy. The third film is garbage, but the second film, the third film he also did not direct, so you could attribute some of that to that. But the second film was actually a pretty influential film to me. It was a good case study about pacing, which is, I think, his biggest thing, is he does breakneck pacing, and in that movie, I think it was done really well. And so even while he was directing Star Trek, he was like, I'm not really a Star Trek fan, and I'm going to inflame all the Star Trek fans right now by saying the director of the Star Trek franchise is a Star Wars fan. And he was he was not afraid to inflame the Star Trek fans by saying so. But yeah, so I would say he's at least personally the real deal when it comes to enjoying the franchise, even if you might disagree about what his visions might be for the franchise. So, yes. Then a bunch of directors get courted and slated on, then removed in a very Disney fashion that I won't bore you with the details, but eventually Rian Johnson gets brought on board. Now, I think the reason JJ was brought on board was also because he was a vocal Star Wars fan, and also because Star Trek is also a space movie. I would totally believe Disney thinks in those terms. And because he does good breakneck, and he's kind of Spielbergian, kind of in the same sort of realm as like the Star Wars aesthetic, kind of. So I think that's why he ended up being pulled on. Then Rian Johnson gets pulled on later after some tumult within Disney as a sort of, I think he was pulled on because he's sort of on board with Kathleen Kennedy's, or at least what I think was initially presented to him as Kathleen Kennedy's ethos for her changes to the Star Wars universe. Yes, so that's the backdrop. Now, Rian Johnson was supposed to finish out the trilogy, and we all know now that that didn't end up happening, that JJ came back for the third film. We also all know that the third film was garbage. I don't think we need to explain that to any human being out there. The third film was probably one of the most disappointing cinematic experiences I've ever experienced in the theater, and I think a lot of people share that sentiment, especially because I'm sympathetic to JJ as a director. Not my favorite director, but I think he has his talents. So yeah, that was it. Now, just a brief overview of what I think about the first film in the trilogy. I thought it was okay. I could pontificate on that a lot, but I won't. I think that JJ's pacing comes out in a very obvious manner. It's very breakneck. It's just he's very action-oriented, very moving the plot line as quickly as possible so that you're hopefully, I think the vibe for him is that you're sort of white-knuckled on the seat. I don't think it works as well for Star Wars as it does for the second film in Star Trek at all. But I didn't hate it. I also am not a Star Wars fan, so I kind of found it amusing, the amount of similarities between it and the first film in the original trilogy, but that's probably sacrilegious to say. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a me thing. So then Rian Johnson comes to the next one, works with JJ on where the story will progress. Rian Johnson is not the breakneck type director at all.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why is it that they changed to Rian Johnson for the second movie?
That's just how they negotiated it. I think JJ actually wanted to direct all of them, but I'm not sure what the internals were for why. Ben, do you know why, by any chance?
I'm not sure that anybody actually knows the answer to that question outside of, the corporate boardroom and Lucasfilm. It does. So there initially were plans. I think Bob Iger at the time said that JJ, had written out all the scripts for all three films. And then they decided not to go with that.
Yeah, I don't have an answer then. So we get to the second film, The Last Jedi. Now, from a story building perspective, we've already set up the trilogy to be a little bit more complicated than the original trilogy. We've got a little bit more characters. We've got a little bit more going on. And I think that kind of makes sense with the way JJ would write a Star Wars movie because of his love of having different plot lines and they converge and et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the way that he writes. But with Rian Johnson, if you've ever seen Knives Out, which is his creation, I think Knives Out is an excellent film, by the way. Would definitely recommend. Not a 5 out of 5 film, but it's definitely worth a watch.
But $400 million for 2 more of them.
Yes, that's. I found that out while I was doing research for this episode, and I was like, Knives Out was great, but I wouldn't necessarily make a franchise out of this. But that's what Hollywood is doing. So, and Rian Johnson seems all too happy to do what Hollywood is doing, to put it lightly. But
it's hard to turn down $400 million.
That's true, but he definitely has prospects, like after Knives Out in particular, like going into the future, and I would have used that to do what I want to do. Because clearly he's Knives Out was a clear, because he's a newer director on the block, and Knives Out was clearly a very well-directed film from all aspects. So I give him props for being good at what he does. So I don't know, but and I actually want to explain why I think that Rian Johnson shouldn't be blamed for how the series ended up. I see a lot of people hating on him. I understand it totally because there are decisions that are definitely come from him, but that people don't like. But from a filmmaking perspective, I kind of want to cut him a lot of slack here because there are some things that are clearly from the corporate side that happened that made it way worse than it had to be. And there are some things that I think people don't really understand where he was going, and the way the third film ended up didn't just ruined where he was going at all with the franchise. Because again, Disney doesn't understand art. They were like, what if we just switch up the direction every single film as if that's going to work? That's not how it works. in terms of like the writing direction, you know. But essentially, Rian Johnson describes his approach to the second film as a subversion of expectations. Now, I actually think that's an overstatement, to be honest, because the first film was already like the first. I mean, like how much would you subvert our expectations after the first film? You'd have to like to copy again, like Empire Strikes Back or something, to be within our expectations. It's not hard to subvert. He didn't pull like a is Finn the main character or Rey the main character kind of thing. I think he just took it an aesthetic different direction and a writing different direction. So what I'm going to do is now that I have my live editing powers, I'm going to throw up on the screen what is the hero's journey. So there you go. You should see it. And Star Wars functions off of the classic hero's journey model. Yeah. Yeah, so the hero's journey is an interesting thing in that it's very core to the way humans tell story, like epic stories. You'll see it pretty much everywhere where there's like a hero in a journey, therefore a hero's journey. You'll see it a lot in superhero movies, particularly in the fantasy setting. It tends to be extremely common. And I happen to think that it's an underrated way to tell stories. It involves a lot of thematic complexity often, and a lot of character complexity. I'm not the kind of person who says, "Oh, it's a formula, it's bad." No, that's not what it is. If you're going to use a template or you're going to use a strategy, you've got to use it well. That's the way you make something good. Although I do welcome experimenting in story structure. I always think that's cool. Yeah, you'll see it starts with, let's see if I can read it. It starts with leaving the ordinary world. So you can think of Luke on Tatooine and his, normal life with his family. And then all of a sudden things change. That's sort of the leaving the ordinary world. There's the call to adventure, which is, why do you have to continue this leave of the ordinary world? Oftentimes you'll see here there's always the character has to go through like a sort of dilemma of like, do I want to leave? Do I not want to leave? And they have to make the hero's choice, which is to leave despite what they're leaving behind, despite that they're leaving normalcy. And et cetera, et cetera. I won't describe every single part. That'll take too long. But you get the idea that Star Wars sort of follows this model very closely. Now, the interesting thing about the hero's journey is that you can do, just like most other story structure, you can do the story structure in one iteration, and you can have it arch throughout an entire series. So in Star Wars, you have this, where in every, mostly in the first film, but in every film, you've got like a mini hero's journey going on. And in the entire trilogy, you have a very distinct, clear hero's journey going on throughout the entire trilogy. I actually really love when that wrapping happens, where you have like a smaller version of the big piece every chunk. That makes a lot of sense in cinema, especially versus, let's say, TV. And I think it works well for Star Wars. It really conveys the point of Star Wars. So let's take that hero's journey model and apply it to the new trilogy and see where they were going. And I do think that the original idea of this new trilogy was to obey the hero's journey model. At least that was the beginning idea when it came down to writing from JJ's perspective, et al., and all the other writers. And then when it came to Rian Johnson's perspective, he may have had a different way of approaching the hero's journey, but I think he was trying to continue the path of the hero's journey. What I find really fascinating about the way Rian Johnson approached the series is that since he's a lot of a slower paced director, since he's a lot less action oriented, he really drills into what are the characters going through and how can I pull out what the essence of each character is, which is, I think, more ambitious than people give credit for Star Wars movies, sorry, not Star Wars movie. I mean just blockbuster movies. To go a little bit more into the characters. And so I really like that aspect of the film. And one thing I found interesting that I found when I was doing research for this was that he said that his decision, spoilers coming forward, I don't think anyone cares if you're listening to this, but the reason why he wrote Rey's parents to be nobodies, which is definitely the way it was supposed to be permanently, by the way. That wasn't supposed to be like a made you look for later. That was the intent, was that was supposed to be the truth of Rey's character. You can tell from the writing very clearly. But
sorry, what was it? What about the parents?
That they're nobodies. That they're. I think there's this. She's looking at the force hole. I don't know what the real name of it is. And she asks, "Show me my parents." She sees herself and nothing. Right.
Kylo Ren tells her that her parents are nobodies.
And that makes a lot of sense from a writing perspective. Essentially, when he talks about the decision to do it that way, he says, "How can I mimic for Rey's character what Luke goes through when he learns that Darth Vader is his father? How would that make sense for the character that he envisions Rey to be? Because Rey is not Luke, right? Rey is Rey. And Rey comes from a different background. Like Luke comes from a background where he may not have, obviously grown up with his parents, but he grew up with parent-like figures, right? Rey doesn't even have that. She's on her own, and she has this backstory that I think is a great backstory to start with, although it gets absolutely crushed later on. But her backstory is that she has been waiting for her parents. In fact, the dilemma of her leaving is a hard choice in an extreme sense, because she has this attachment all her life that her parents are going to come back for her. That is a very good essence to keep drawing out of her character, to explore who she is. And hero's journeys are supposed to draw out the essence of the hero. The hero is not supposed to be perfect. She learns that her parents were nobodies. They were drunkards, I think is even what Kylo says. And so he says that that's the way he envisioned her character going through as much devastation as Luke went through when he learned at his critical inflection a hard truth, right? I think that's cool. And if you look at the hero's journey loop, it's like this second film. Sorry, I have to go off screen to see a little bit, but we've sort of had our miniature victory after the first film, and now we're in the self-discovery phase. And Rian Johnson wants to draw out this self-discovery thing throughout this film. I think the original script probably did that a lot better than what ended up happening, because there are a lot of distractions and a lot of Disney-isms that occur along the way. But that, I would say, is what he's trying to do. I also really love the creative, again, this might be blasphemy, but I'm thinking about it as a writer. If I was given the tools of the Star Wars universe, how would I use them? The way that he uses the Force in order to force that connection between Rey and Kylo, because they're dramatic foils of each other, I think that is something that is wholly unique to the Star Wars universe. You couldn't do that if you didn't have that mechanism. So he took something that is only Star Wars and he used it to the benefit of the characters, which I found was a genius move. You couldn't do that same mechanism in a realistic movie. In this universe, you have this unique tool that allows you to draw out the dramatic foils of Rey and Kylo in a very nice way. So all of that, I think, is really good. So Rey's character done awesomely in that film. I think better than in the first film. Kylo's character done better than the first film. Every other character, holy smokes. Like, every other character was garbage. And that has to do with, I think I can safely say a lot of that are Disney-isms causing that to happen. I think if Rian Johnson is thinking very character-oriented, he wouldn't have fractured the gang in the way that ended up happening. The first film, and if you were new to the Star Wars universe or you weren't as tied to the universe as, say, someone like me, you found the charisma and the chemistry between the actors to be quite infectious, especially between Rey and Finn and what's his name, the pilot guy. You're on
Poe?
Cameron.
Yeah, Poe, yeah. And that was quite infectious to me because I think they casted that in a very deliberate way. They probably spent a lot of time having them in the same room together, and they just came off as friends. And it's the buddy journey that is, I think, also kind of Star Wars like, at least comparing to the original trilogy. I really liked all of that setup going into this trilogy, except now we have weird things going on. So what are some of the weird things? The first scene of The Last Jedi was a complete turnoff. Like, oh man, like talk about a complete garbage. The idea that you would play for a joke, Rey trying to hand Luke's lightsaber to him, and he just like tosses it off to the side in a very Marvelistic way. I'm not a Star Wars fan, but that really bugged me. That like really irked me, and that did not set me up well for the rest of the film.
I didn't watch The Last Jedi. What happened?
So the end of the first movie ends with Rey meeting with Luke, finding Luke, and she wants to give the lightsaber to Luke, his own lightsaber back because she acquired it. And and at the beginning of the next film, he takes the lightsaber and tosses it, and it's like a comedic toss. It's not like it's not a dramatic. It's not pregnant with drama. It's literally like.
Was it like a wide shot and there's like no music or anything like that, and it just kind of like
fling, yeah.
It just kind of like happened, like
yeah.
I can imagine this like without having even seen the movie. I get what they're going for.
Terrible decision.
This sounds like a bad idea.
It's so frustrating to like people who are really Star Wars fans. Like, you know, if you've read all of the 26, 27 years of the expanded universe, or I guess under Disney they're called, it's called Legends now, which basically is just following Luke for the next 43 years. I mean, like that's the story. Like that's what Star Wars is. Everyone's waited. If you're a fan of it, like you've waited to see what Disney's going to do with Luke, and then he just throws the lightsaber away, and it goes downhill from there.
Okay, I can even imagine this. Like even without being a Star Wars fan, like I was thinking like of an equivalency. If you're watching Harry Potter, right? And then this is a significantly smaller thing too, right? It's like Harry just throws his wand out. That there's that whole scene where he's picking his wand at Diagon Alley, right? That's such a less important thing than I feel would be than that like Luke's lightsaber would be to him. Yeah, I still feel like that would be like a horrible choice to just throw out like some his wand. That sounds like a bad idea, and just for a small haha. Apparently, if you even find that funny,
Oh man, yeah, it's a Marvelism for sure. Like it's definitely like it's like the equivalent of a cinematic quip in the Marvel universe that it's garbage. You don't undercut dramatic moments like that. And here's the thing, I don't actually mind, and that goes to the fact that I'm not a Star Wars fan, and I totally appreciate the fact that there was a whole extended universe. I actually didn't get into that, although that was something I wanted to talk about, but I'm going on a little bit long. But like Disney just Kathleen Kennedy said, I don't want to deal with all this stuff because it gets in the way of the ultimate ideology I want to come through in this new Star Wars trilogy. And that's why it was thrown away, which that is a terrible and frustrating reason for it to be thrown away. If that didn't exist, so in my view, if I just ignore the extended universe as if it didn't exist and ignore the fact that that was like decades in the making, from a writing perspective, I actually understand why it would be interesting for Luke's character to shift in the way it did, because I found it extremely dramatic. But you don't undercut that drama of a hero, of a previous hero's journey, by playing it for a joke. Like, it's just not like it's a terrible. I don't even understand that. Like on a surface level, why you would make that decision. It's not subverting of expectations. It's literally just it's undercutting your the tension that you had from the prior movie. It just doesn't make sense. So I actually don't mind Luke's direction, because I think that's an interesting. It's like it's that Luke comes home in this hero's journey, but he's got because the hero's journey is kind of marked by your hero having a fatal flaw, and that fatal flaw has to be worked out in order for you to come home, right? If you look at the little circle there, and Luke has finished, essentially, is what what the original trilogy has told you on its own, is that he's covered his fatal flaws and he's back home. But since we're picking up in a universe in which he's still alive, it completely makes sense to revive his hero's journey and say, look, he was young, and look, he's got this one other fatal flaw that he's kind of partially smoothed over, but he's got to make atonement for, which, if you look on the circle, is there. And that was always interesting, and it created a dramatic foil out of Kylo. It was just, this is from a unfeeling external perspective, this is good thematic writing. This is how you captivate an audience into the core of humanity, like what makes us people, what is the strive for goodness, like Luke doesn't just stop at being a corrupt person, right? Because his fate ends up being he has to atone, and then he goes home, kind of, right, into the Force. That's the way it goes in the new trilogy. It makes a lot of thematic sense, and if you look at the circle, it makes sense on the hero's journey, that he kind of continues on that journey. But so it just, the problem is in the bloat. That's where the problem was. Finn's character was destroyed in that movie, and I'll never forgive them for that, because nothing that happens to Finn's character makes any thematic sense at all. Because here, I'll set it up how Rian Johnson probably thought about it. Kylo is like a foil in the sense that he's a seduction towards not wanting to atone for his sins and not wanting to become a better person in order to overcome the grand struggle that you're fighting against. That makes sense. He's like a seduction, right? And they even portray that in like a literal like love, or I don't want to say love, because I don't think that should have been the way it should have been presented. It should have been more like seduction, right? You think about it from like a human parable sort of way. It's like it's like the seduction of demons, right? It's like the draw towards something that looks good but isn't really good, right? Heroes journeys rely on this good evil like perspective. If you're going down that route, you have to go down that route. There can't be ambiguity about like what is good or blah blah. This like postmodern sort of like ideology cannot be injected in there, or else it messes up the whole thing. It's not, heroes' journeys are not here to ask questions about goodness. They're here to show you someone overcome the struggle to become good. That is the point, and so his character should have been a seduction, a false seduction into a different way, Whether or not his character would become good later is something you could have played with, right? But what should have happened is that you shouldn't have created a love triangle out of it. That's not the way it should have been, because you had a perfect parallel in Finn, not as seduction, right? But as like friendship and like wholesomeness and like, and essentially a good attraction, right? Like to the good side of things. That makes a lot more sense writing wise. That is not apparent in this movie at all, because they create an ambiguity about Rey and Kylo's relationship from a hero's journey perspective, and that gets blown the heck up in the third movie, to the point where the hero's journey doesn't exist at all in the third movie. What is this? This is Kathleen Kennedy's doing. After doing research about this, I came across enough evidence that really what she did was she wanted this ambiguity, which I really do think is a postmodern sort of understanding of the hero's journey, where it's like, is it okay? Is it not okay? Like, that's the way she wanted to go with that direction. The second thing is that she had essentially quotas for the kinds of characters that she needed to be in her films, one of which had to be an Asian female. So that had to be a main character. Now, this series was already a little bit more complex than the original trilogy in terms of the amount of characters involved and the amount of plot lines involved. Then you add another character that has to be a main character in the middle of the trilogy that wasn't pre-written into the trilogy. Well, how else do you expect that's going to go over? You end up sidetracking Finn into what he wasn't supposed to be thematically, into this other, like, that only serves to be romantic tension. Really? That's what you wanted? Like, you sacrifice Finn's character for romantic tension between him and some character we've never met before? How does that doesn't make any sense from a writing level. And my understanding is that she wasn't in the trilogy at all from the beginning. Listen, guys, like, you cannot do this to art. You just can't do this. Like, if you want to make art your vehicle for your, I'm going to call it like what it is, because even if you agree with the premise of what's being done, propaganda is propaganda. That just is like that. You cannot force feed your audience, and essentially by artistic force, not even artistic, by force of presentation, try to get your audience to agree with you. If you think that's the way art works, you're out of your mind, because I guarantee you that's not even an effective tactic. You just pissed everyone off. That's all you did, and so it was a terrible move to do, and you killed Finn's character, which, by the way, I don't have to tell anyone, is a black character. Like, so even if you're going by the ideology, because of your lack of understanding of writing and art, you killed off essentially a black character, if you want to look at it from that perspective. So none of that made any sense. Then you had Commander Holdo, as I think her name.
Admiral is she Vice Admiral Holdo or just Admiral Holdo?
I'm not sure, but whatever she is,
something of some sort.
She should not be in this movie. Like, she sucks all the life out of Leia's character, first of all, because like all the screen time she should have had made a lot more sense for Leia to take up thematically in terms of the writing of the trilogy. Leia and Han, both of them, should have taken up all of her space. And so that doesn't make any sense. The other thing that doesn't make sense is that becomes Poe's, like, I don't know, enemy thing. Like, he has to learn how to be like I don't know, less man or something like that through her. Like, I don't know. That's the juxtaposition that was portrayed. What does that have to do with like you just destroyed his character essentially, because he gets sidetracked on this journey that doesn't even feel like him, by the way. It feels like a completely different character. And you ruin the band of friends that frankly was diverse. that you had in the first movie in this new trilogy. It doesn't make any sense at all. These are all Kathleen Kennedy Disney-isms, as I understand it from researching it. These all come from the corporate boardroom world, thinking that this is what sells or whatever. Well, how'd that work out for you? It didn't work.
So wait, what's Kathleen Kennedy's role? What's her job title?
She's president of Lucasfilm, but she essentially like hovers over everything Lucasfilm makes.
Her contract expires in September, and there's let's just say that the majority of the fan base hopes it is not renewed.
I mean, this is the woman who went to an award ceremony with a shirt saying "The Force is female." Like,
does that mean? Why did we have to give the Force a gender?
Well, that's the natural question everyone has.
She clearly, like as you said, views Star Wars as like a vehicle to impose her views, and I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with Asian representation or Black representation or females in leadership roles. Like those are all good things, great things, but she's decided that she needs to hammer that with the art at the expense of the art itself.
This is something that's become sad for me, because this feels like the death of an art form. If we keep doing this will be the death of this art form. This is divisive in a way that people are not understanding. It's not that people disagree with the premise necessarily, although obviously some people disagree with some of the premises. That's not the thing that doesn't get them to watch the movie. The thing that doesn't get them to watch the movie is that you're not genuine. You're not being an artist when you do this kind of stuff. People don't consume art just for entertainment. Surprise, surprise. They consume art because often it speaks to them. Surprise, surprise. And so, this is not something that people just watch to pass the time and then just casually absorb your propaganda. This is something that people want to get something out of in a bigger sense. That's what art is for, even if it is a blockbuster franchise, it's still art. You can't treat it like it's not. This is the reason why cinema is not doing as well as it could be. I'm not being 100% serious, because Disney is cinema right now. If at any given month before the coronavirus, you went to the theater, how many films would be Disney films out of all the films being shown? A disturbing amount, and all coming from the same perspective. This is not the way. If you want to present your ideas in an artistic fashion, first of all, you probably should be an artist. Second of all, that's something you can always do. Some of my favorite films are films that I disagree with. I disagree with the philosophies that they're putting out there, but they're not propaganda. There's a big difference. They're an honest expression of what someone thinks is something they want to convey to their audience. This is not an honest expression. I don't think anyone can argue that this is honesty coming on the screen, because I think Rian Johnson, although I think he's also an ideologue from looking at his Twitter, with similar sort of ideologies, and the way he defends what he did to the franchise makes me think that Kathleen Kennedy could say whatever she wanted to him and he'd go, okay. But his natural inclinations as an artist, and the way that this thing was structured originally, without the perturbations that were made to it by Kathleen Kennedy and co., were a much better presentation of any of the ideas that they wanted to pass on to their audience. And it made a lot more thematic sense. Now, in the third movie, I'll wrap up here, but in the third movie, you get the culmination of garbage. You literally you destroyed Finn's character in the second movie. You created this weird love triangle that did not need to exist. This just, Star Wars is not the place for love triangles, okay? No. It's
well, there was Luke and Leia. That
no,
happened. It's not good.
first of all, that was extremely brief, and that wasn't. They didn't play on it as like an ambiguous love triangle, like will she pick? Like a teenage like movie or something like that. In this new trilogy, it took like a teenage like who will she pick, and then it ends up being like blah anyway. They don't even commit to a direction, probably because their tests, their focus groups didn't have a definitive answer for them as to what exactly would be the most pleasing to the audience. Um, and they completely destroyed the hero's journey. And as I understand, sorry about the sirens, as I understand, Kathleen Kennedy, part of her point with Rey's character that she didn't like was that she had flaws. That's the point. That's the point, is that she has flaws. She turned her into the generic non-speaking, ironically non-speaking, essentially non-speaking, because she doesn't say anything of value, right? Essentially non-speaking female role. This was a common trend, especially by these boardroom movies before this movie, where you had a lead female character that essentially was not a character because she had no growth, because they thought that the best way to go about creating new female characters was that people want to see someone who has no flaws. What? Like, that's patently false. Everyone wants to see, if you want to go by this sort of ideology, then you want to see a female overcome her flaws. Because that is what's heroic about her. It's not slashing people with a lightsaber. It's about overcoming the seduction to the dark side. It's about overcoming other interpersonal problems you may have. It's about being brave enough to step up to the plate, right? And all of these things are destroyed in the third movie because the hero journey is just completely abandoned. They just abandon it. And then we get nothing, and I don't even know what they could have done with that movie, honestly. I think JJ just kind of threw everything at the screen because it really feels like a montage of like nothing, and from what I understand in terms of the production of that movie is that he was heavily controlled by the boardroom, as it were, that they didn't trust after the relatively poor reception of the second film, that they thought that the problem was with Rian Johnson's vision. They didn't understand the problem was them. They just cannot accept that at all.
Why does it always seem like Disney always finds the problem is not them?
Wow.
Or actually, not even just Disney, but like, the storytelling me about, the DC universe, it just seems like they're always just like, oh yeah, it's not me. It's them. It's the artists, I promise.
And the audience, right?
Oh,
like,
yes.
literally the official Lucasfilm Twitter account is like, if you have a problem with The Last Jedi, you're a man baby. You got to get your moral priorities straight. Like, you can legitimately not like the film and not be the reason is not that I hate women in leading roles.
Now, the crazy part, this is kind of going on a slight tangent, but the crazy part is that a lot of these decisions are made either by feel, like by what their executives tell them, like Kathleen Kennedy. Like, I think a lot of people have a misconception about how these boardrooms work. They are not smart. Like, they're not doing advanced calculations on what scene they should put, whatever. They're not doing something. No, that's not what's happening. They're listening to Kathleen Kennedy and they believe her. Part of that's because of her prior success with Steven Spielberg, which there's a lot of funny things I could say about that, but that's a whole other story. Some of that's because of her prior success. Some of that's because they use Twitter as a zeitgeist when they should not ever use Twitter as a zeitgeist. That's the most biased sample you could possibly pick, honestly. The loud voices on Twitter are not the average person. Surprise, surprise. The loud voices on Reddit are not the average person. Surprise, surprise. These are not representations of real human beings, right? And so they see these Twitter battles, they see someone get killed, and they're like, oh, I want to be on the right side of that battle. The irony is that if you poll people, real people, and you poll them scientifically, with rigor, you will find that your decisions that you're making with these films are not popular even amongst women and even amongst minorities. It's not popular. And so when your films go down revenue-wise each time, you have only yourself to blame. You really do. Because you didn't even convince, the demographics you were trying to woo that this was, a worthwhile venture. Destroying Star Wars was a worthwhile venture. Destroying what humans love about heroes overcoming their adversity is a worthwhile venture, as if that's not a timeless thing, So that's what I gotta say. Disney is evil again. I don't know how. I have like probably 20 different ways to say Disney is an evil corporation, and Lucasfilm has like a dumpster fire of a person leading it, because that person thinks that they are lead propagandist for the Disney for the Lucasfilm properties. And good luck to them. I really do. I mean that seriously, because like we can't keep going on like this, and I'll watch my art form die before I get to participate with it in it. So I really hope, even as much as I think they're monopoly and despise them, I hope that they figure themselves out enough so that I can come in and compete with them. So, yeah, that's what I have to say.
All right, so I'll be talking about the Star Wars game Battlefront 2, and specifically talking about the fact that unbalanced games aren't inherently bad, but Battlefront 2 is too unbalanced as a game, and it could easily be fixed, probably. That was kind of a long topic, but yeah. Firstly, the first part of that is that unbalanced games are not inherently bad, and you can tell because almost all multiplayer games are unbalanced. If we just, we're not going to talk about single player for now. That's a whole nother realm of balancing. But you're talking about one person on the internet against another person on the internet. Almost all multiplayers are unbalanced because almost all multiplayer games are asymmetrical. And where you have asymmetry, where your map design is not exactly symmetrical, you can play as different characters, whatever it is. You're not going to have something that's exactly the same, unless the different characters are just cosmetic. But in for the most part, even in something say like Fortnite, right? Even though your characters are the same, you might drop in a different spot, and that's going to, you have different luck with loot, and that's going to affect the rest of your game, and so the game is inherently unbalanced.
For people who don't know, what is the concept of balance to begin with?
Yeah, okay, I was going to explain that. So this is why I'm separating this into single player and multiplayer, because I feel like if I said a definition for both, it'd be very generic. So I'm just going to say a definition for multiplayer balance, and a balanced game would be something where both teams or both players, whether it be play solos or teams, have an equal opportunity at winning, and it's about your skill at the game, and not about anything having to do with luck or anything like that. A perfectly balanced game, for example, like chess. Chess is a perfectly balanced game because both sides start with exactly the same pieces and exactly the same formation. The only slight difference is that one player goes first. So I guess the game technically isn't perfectly balanced, but it's near perfect, because that's the someone going first is not the biggest deal ever. It might change things a little bit, but it's very, very, very close to being a perfectly balanced games. And so with chess, you can see that if such a thing as just a turn difference is going to make a game unbalanced, almost all games are unbalanced. And so yeah, and balance is very important when you're considering game design, because that it does not directly correlate to being fun, as we'll see, but it often can help. And I'll get to that later. But yeah, so all games or most games are inherently imbalanced, and so you can see that you don't need balance to be perfect. However, I'd argue that there's a threshold where a game becomes too unbalanced. Now, where this line is sort of hard to determine because it's not like a finite number you can measure, of balance or something. What we're really trying to do in a game is just maximize fun, right? So as long as, the people are having fun, it's okay to be unbalanced. So an example of that would actually be a section within Battlefront 2. So Battlefront 2 being a Star Wars themed game, the whole concept is, there are various game modes, but in general, you play as either the Sith or Jedi, sort of teams, and you fight each other for whatever objective it is that you need to do. So, within Battlefront, there are, what do you call them? Call them spaceships? Like fighters, fighters, right? TIE fighters, whatever, X-Wings, Y-Wings, etc. That you can fly around. These are very unbalanced in that they're almost entirely useless to the game mode supremacy. The game mode supremacy, I've never once been affected. I've never seen a flying vehicle affect the tide of the game, right? Because the game, takes place mostly on land in that game mode specifically. There's not really much to do in the air. And so I find that, hopping into a fighter is not really going to help out my team at all. Yet I find it very fun. I can fly around these things doing literally nothing for my team. Like no one in the air is doing anything for their team, but it's just fun to have a dogfight with whoever. It's like a separate game within the game. This is very unbalanced because the fighters are entirely useless, and so it doesn't actually do anything useful. You're at a disadvantage, I guess, by using a fighter, but it's very fun. But here's what the problem is in terms of the rest of the game and its imbalance. So if you didn't know, the game split up into sort of classes, right? You can select a class, which is sort of like a character archetype you can think of that you can spawn as, I'm trying to make this clear for those who don't, may not play video games very often, but it's kind of hard. But so there are different types of people you can play as. And so there are three main categories. You have your basic classes, which are, I guess, standard infantry. You have your reinforcements, which are, a little more beefy, they have some specialties, whatever. And you have your heroes. Heroes are both Sith and Jedi, essentially. So, you have they're the only ones with lightsabers, and some of them have blasters, like Finn would have a blaster, for example. And I find that it's very incredibly unbalanced, this is. And I think, DICE, the developer of the game, knew this, clearly, and they thought it was okay. I don't think it is, specifically because of the heroes. So if you face a hero as either a reinforcement or a basic class, you essentially stand zero chance. There is absolutely no chance you are winning against a hero, especially a lightsaber one if it's close to you. You're basically done for. The only thing you can do is spam shift or spam alt to roll away from them and hope another hero comes to save you. And the relative near future, the whole 10 seconds you have to survive. But that's unlikely. So in a 1v1 situation where you find yourself stranded, you are basically screwed if there's a hero attacking you.
It simulates a real Star Wars world.
Yeah, I'll get to that. Now, how does this differ from reinforcements, for example, who are a more beefy version, a better version, objectively, of normal basic class? Why is it not unfair? It is unfair. Why is it not? Why is it still fun to be killed, for example, by a reinforcement? Well, I'd say that it's because the playing field is a lot more similar, right? And I'll be honest, it does feel bad to be, some reinforcement that can fly. What do you call them? Jet troopers. There's flying over a building and then just one-shotting you with a rocket because they have a rocket, unlike any other class that can kill you in one hit. That does feel bad because you essentially had no choice in the matter. It wasn't really about your skill. Maybe you were caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe you shouldn't have been there. But there's a chance that you actually were just in a perfectly reasonable spot and you actually just got killed because the other guy was a significantly stronger character than you. I think this is okay because playing as that character, yourself playing as a reinforcement, is very fun. I think it balances itself out. It's, you may lose some in terms of, when you're against the reinforcement. When you're playing the reinforcement, it feels fun, and it feels fun because it's, the play, you're not actually OP or overpowered like that. You're like a hero. I mean, like you're not, invincible. You can't just run into like, an army of 1 million people. You still have to play tactically, and you still have to be good at the game to survive, especially because you're going to be a big target as, one of these reinforcements. But the heroes lack that sort of thing where one, the playing field is way greater. Reinforcements even themselves stand no chance. You can have multiple reinforcements. If it's like Anakin Skywalker, who, one of his abilities is able to like force choke everyone in a certain range around him, like you just do that, and I mean, you basically you've cleared the area. There's no possibility of death. Pretty much, I'm not saying that heroes are a magical solution to not dying. It's actually, playing a hero does take some level of skill, but it doesn't take skill when you're up against one or two normal troops or whatever, and those who are being played as them definitely just feel that in a hard way. Whereas with a reinforcement, they have a better chance, and also when you play reinforcements, I would argue it's more fun because you're at a more even playing field anyways.
As a quick question,
yeah.
When you like enter the game, are you like randomly assigned one of those roles, or do you have to like earn one of the higher roles?
Okay, yeah, that's an important part to explain. So the way it works in Battlefront 2 changed from the original Battlefront. So, or not the original, there were actually ones before Battlefront 1, but we'll not get into that. Battlefront 2, essentially you have you get points. I think they're called command points or something like that. I don't know why that name is. I don't know. There's some type of point, right? I can't remember what it's called exactly, but you get points for doing things like successfully capturing an objective point or doing damage to other players. You actually get more. You get points from dying to a hero, because I think the game's like, oh yeah, we feel bad. Let's give you some points. And essentially, when you die, when you choose to respawn, you can spend those points to play as a better character. So the base class all the 4 base classes are free. Then the other reinforcements, which range in price, and then you have the heroes, which are all 4,000, which is fairly expensive depending on how good you are at the game. Yeah, so the heroes are the most expensive ones. And there are also limits on how many you can have. So there can't be more than 2 Anakin Skywalkers in the game. Once someone has chosen it, you cannot be that character until they die. Reinforcements, you can have a few of them at once. You can have a few jet troopers at once, a few arc troopers at once, whatever. But you can't. There's a finite amount still. The base classes, you can have as many as you want. So that's sort of how that's, I guess more balanced in that you won't come across heroes that often is, the thing. When you do, it's definitely not a good time. And yeah, I think this is really detrimental to the game. So I think there are very easy fixes that could be made. So I understand the reason why EA or DICE, which is owned by EA, probably decided to do this is because one game of the thing it does very good is make you feel like you're actually there. That was definitely my first impression when I was playing the game. It was like, wow, this feels so immersive. This is like, one of the most immersive games I've ever played, like the hecticness of like seeing like, was it 32v32 like players, coming at each other, and then you have like, you see Darth Vader like tearing up like a whole group of people, next to you or whatever, force choking people. It's just it's a very unique experience that, you can't find anywhere else, especially because it's the only, you have to buy a license, to make it, or there's be some deal to have the rights to make a Star Wars game. So you can't, you're not gonna find this anywhere else. I thought it was very appealing. So I understand why they made the heroes very powerful, because in the actual movies and other renditions of the story, you'll see that the heroes are essentially the massive powerhouses. They sway battles like in the original trilogy and the sequels, and not the prequels. Yeah, in the original trilogy and the sequels, I believe there are at max 2 Jedi or 2 Sith ever present at a given time, and yet these people managed to literally like, change history, destroy a Death Star twice, for example, it's a bit crazy. So I understand what they're doing here, and that they want you to, to continue that immersive experience. They decided to make the heroes very powerful for the sake of the game. This is not something that, at the end of the day, it's about fun. You know what I'm saying? And immersion may add in fun, but at the same time, being killed by the same hero 70 times over because you can't like do anything about him is also a big problem. I think I think you can actually fix the problem by making it more realistic. Actually, more realistic towards the actual franchise, and that's because in the game the heroes are absolute bullet sponges. They can take damage like crazy. You can shoot them 1 billion times and they won't die, right? I mean, in the movies, that's not why they're able to evade death so much. It's because they have the lightsaber and they have a connection with the Force that allows them to deflect oncoming blaster fire, right? You can do this in the game by holding right click and you have a sort of stamina bar, defense stamina bar that goes down as you deflect bullets over time. So you can't just deflect forever, and then eventually it replenishes. As long as you're not consistently using that part of the Force, right? If you lower the health of everyone, you'll still have the dynamic where these people are a lot more powerful, and it will feel more like the game. Instead of just Anakin bullet sponging running through 1 billion people. That doesn't really feel like Star Wars, because it isn't Star Wars. I think one concern with having a lower amount of damage to kill them might be that, well, if they're caught off guard, then they can be killed immediately, and that's 4,000 points right there is what they cost, and that's a lot of points. And in the real Star Wars universe, that wouldn't actually happen because they have the Force to sense things or whatever, and you can't actually have that in real life to be able to be like, oh, it's an enemy behind me. I think you could. I think you can have a system which exists in other games where you automatically deflect things without player input. Perhaps it gives you a few grace like shots before the player has to actively do something to prevent their death. I think this would add more skill to the characters, and it would make them more realistic, and they'd be worse, which is great because that's kind of the problem, is that they're very powerful. So that's pretty much all I have to say for the sort of heroes aspect of it. But I find the game is also unbalanced in another regard, and that's simply matchmaking. Matchmaking in the game is completely random, which is so outdated it's ridiculous for a modern game. Like from a AAA developer like DICE with EA, who has all the money in the world behind them, you know what I'm saying? Not that this is an expensive thing to implement. This is really not that many lines of code, relatively speaking, to actually do this. I mean, if they wanted to hire me, I would literally do it, probably for free. Like, actually, this is a very simple thing to do. That I understand this wasn't a thing before, but you get with the times, especially as a modern AAA developer. So the problem is sometimes you join a game and you get absolutely stomped on because, matchmaking is random. You get put with random people. Some people tend to be more experienced than you. You press tab to look at the scoreboard and you see like 3,000 level 100s against, you like level 10 team or whatever, right? And this could quite easily be fixed by having simple matchmaking. I know that, in the past, matchmaking has been something that's been confined to ranked games, competitive games. For example, like Counter-Strike, for example, if you join a casual lobby, I'm pretty sure there's no skill-based ranking, although I could be wrong. Whereas if you join a competitive ranked match, you will be ranked based on your skill. And your skill is tracked as you play those games. But then you can look at more modern games, not that CSGO is still played, but it came out quite a while ago. I'm saying games that actually is not true based on my example, but more modern takes on this, I should say, would be games like Valorant and Rocket League, which match you on skill no matter whether you're playing casually or competitively. So, even if your rank is not showed when you're playing casually, both Valorant and Rocket League will track your progress, and as you win and lose games, it'll bump you up or down in an invisible rank that you can't actually see. And it'll match you with people of similar skill. I understand that a game that's, I think, 32 versus 32 in the in Supremacy game mode in Battlefront 2 is a lot to ask for when you're talking about finding 32 people or 64 total people of similar skill. But it's definitely a step up from literally random. You could, at the very least, if you have a very weird, power dynamic where you have, a lot of very skilled people on the game and a lot of, very new people. You can at least distribute it so that the teams are evenly split, where you have the same amount of highly experienced people on one team as the other one, and the same amount of, people who just started on one team as the other team. I think this really destroys the game in the fact that, at least I'm talking about the Supremacy game mode specifically, because that's the one I have most experience with, and I don't really want to talk about the other ones that I've only played a few times, so I'm not entirely sure about them. But for the Supremacy game mode, it's a sort of tug of war style game mode. So essentially, as you play, you have to capture these points, and essentially you get points as your team gets points as you capture points. And once you reach the point cap, or whatever it is, then you move on to the second objective. It's a sort of attack defense style objective. So whoever received the most points will be on the attacking side. If they fail to attack within a allotted amount of time, the game essentially resets and goes back to the beginning. It's that sort of tug of war thing where, there's the first, is essentially two games in the game. There's the first game, and whoever wins gets the advantage in the second game. And then if they win that game, they can then win the entire game. If they lose, you go back to the start, and then you do this over and over again. That I said that's actually slightly inaccurate. I'm just making it a bit more brief to, it's not very important. They know all the details. But yeah, so I think the poor team matchmaking definitely hurts in terms of that tug of war style gameplay, because then you never actually utilize the tug of war style gameplay where teams are even. You don't feel this tension of like, oh man, I've been at this game for, so long, trying to like finally, beat that second objective, but they keep pushing me back or whatever. It doesn't happen. Usually it's just a clean sweep by one team, just by luck, because chances are you're not going to have a perfectly balanced team like that. So, I think, that's probably one of the most unique parts of the game, is that game mode is very interesting. The concept is very interesting, but it's not executed well because of simple, like negligence just to do matchmaking, which is something that's been, now it's standardized, and it's like, why isn't this a thing yet? It's so, I don't know, it's so bothersome. But that's really all I have to say about my topic.
I don't think any dice game has matchmaking like that, actually.
No. Not that I'm aware of, no. At least actually, no, I actually have no excuse. Never mind. No. It doesn't really make sense to me.
You know why they would care, like to mix the skill levels like that?
This is one of the things I actually have no exposure for. There are a lot of things in the video game industry that just absolutely boggle my mind. Like, why wouldn't you just do this? It's so simple. It's literally just a recipe for more money, right? You know what I'm saying? I don't quite get it. DICE is not one that's, specifically DICE under EA is not one that's, known for being the most artistically great, in terms of game design. A lot of times just make a beautiful game, looks great, it's like almost, in terms of gameplay, it's almost there. You almost had it, but we're not going to go the final step because we're just going to make the next game instead, They tried to balance, they tried to balance the heroes. They tried not very well. The heroes themselves are still fairly unbalanced. Like Yoda is known as like one of the worst ones, for example. Does that make sense in terms of the story? Not really, but okay. And those things like Darth Maul, if we're talking about DICE's like unwillingness to polish the game perfectly, Darth Maul has a pretty bad glitch where one of his moves is one where essentially he does this spin move and he like lunges at you and spins his lightsaber around, and if he hits you, he does a lot of damage. This move will randomly go through people, like not infrequently. Like it's I've played as Darth Maul before, and it's very like unfortunate when you're like, oh, I got you now, I got you now. I use the move, you just go right through them, and it's like, okay, I guess. So yeah, I don't think EA is too concerned with finishing up a game. More like, oh, it's here. We finished our contract with Lucasfilms. We got the money. Everyone bought the game. The game is kind of old now. Move on to the next thing. Move on to Battlefield 6 or whatever they're doing now.
Yeah, like EA is to Disney as Lucasfilm is to DICE at this point, I think.
Oh yeah, EA is like, DICE is like, I would, I feel like I don't know a lot about them in terms of their, willingness to make a good game, for example. I do know they're innovators in technology, and I really do appreciate that in an era where game innovation is seemingly slowing down by the big developers, and it's left to the smaller ones usually to figure things out. And there's some exceptions, like Epic Games actually tends to do some pretty cool stuff, innovatively speaking. But like EA, it's like they're just trying to do the same formula, over and over again, without much experimentation. But seemingly, I feel like DICE is one of their better acquisitions, in that they seem to keep progressing in a way, but they still have that stranglehold over them, so they can't make a. I'm not gonna say they can't make a good game, so I still consider Battlefront 2 a good game. They can't make one that's more about the art and less about the cash.
EA is no longer like the exclusive partner of Lucasfilm, though, right? I think is that true?
I do know that EA. I'm not aware of any games currently in the recent past that have been not been made by EA. I'm not sure what their contract is with Lucasfilms or whatever. But I do know, at least for a long time, they were making all the Star Wars games.
I know they had an exclusive license. I thought I heard somewhere that they no longer have the exclusive license. They're just going to be like primary developers for, I don't know, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I'm not too certain about that.
So I just kind of wanted to take a little bit of time to show my appreciation for Kevin Kiner's music to the Star Wars animated series, which I think is really underappreciated. I mean, most people never heard of Kevin Kiner. I mean, to be fair, to begin with, the viewership for the Clone Wars and Rebels is not terribly high, especially relative to the big blockbuster movies. So that, I think, limits his popularity. But I think it's worth shining some light on his really fantastic work. What's interesting to me is he's not from an orchestral background. He's came into music, from what I understand, as Nirvana guitarist style player, who was actually a pre-med at UCLA, and then while he was there as a junior, I think he still got his degree, in pre-med, but decided that he wanted to spend more time in music, and primarily, again, still through guitar, which is, for someone who's kind of coming from a rock background, to take up the mantle from John Williams, the great orchestral composer. I think that's really impressive. It's also a really impressive feat when the first season of Clone Wars came out in 2008. This is the first real vision. There's the earlier Clone Wars animated by Tarkovsky, who I think all the music for that is just recycled from the films, so that doesn't count. And the first really canonical, I guess, visual presentation of Star Wars outside of the films, and to be composing for that, that's you're doing that. He's doing that in the shadow of John Williams. Of course, he's using a lot of John Williams's themes, as he pretty much has to. But to me, that itself is really impressive. To kind of, I don't think I could step into that role, especially if I wasn't someone who kind of grew up as an orchestral composer, stepping into the shoes of the film franchise, the franchise that kind of defines orchestral scores. So the music for the Clone Wars is, in my opinion, so there are a couple of things to note about it. It is very orchestral. It doesn't really get not orchestral. None of his stuff really gets into kind of electronic world until season 7 of the Clone Wars, which I'll mention a little bit later. But like if you watch the Clone Wars movie, which starts off the series, I mean, right from the very first first notes, it's really very dramatic orchestral music with the kind of flair that is worthy of John Williams. In a recent interview, he is discussing with the person who's interviewing him what qualities work in Star Wars music and why it's kind of odd for him to be the guy tasked with doing that. Which, as I said, he points out that too, that it's really odd for someone of his background to be, the other composer in the orchestral world of Star Wars. But he describes John Williams' music as being really large and grand. And, for a composer is also doing this with all virtual instruments, right? Not an actual live orchestra. I think it's just incredibly obvious from the first note of the season 1 and the Clone Wars movie that he really understood the style and then never goes outside of the style, but leaves his own mark in it. His themes in the Clone Wars tend to be outside of like the really dramatic, heroic, action-based themes, tend to be very small and personal. If you read interviews with him about his creation of the theme for Ahsoka, who's kind of the main character, he talks about how he watched this first scene with her, sitting alone, like thinking about her role in the Clone Wars and in the Jedi Order. He's watched it multiple times and decided he needed like an alto flute to be her musical voice, and kind of an outside instrumental pick. He continues that work with Rebels as well. Star Wars Rebels definitely not as well received overall as the Clone Wars. And he, the Clone Wars has some of this too, but Rebels in particular has a lot more of has a little bit more focus, target audience of younger kids. Although, I mean, I love it. Lots of adults like it, but he certainly does a really good job too with like changing tone to kind of capture the, I guess we could describe it as. To adults, overly silly, but obviously with Lucasfilm's aim being, appealing to the youngest kids. But even there, I think the music is really sincere. His scores really mature along with the characters, and as the seasons go on, which is something I really not noticed in a lot of TV series where, it's helpful, of course, that the main characters in Rebels and Clone Wars, Ahsoka and Ezra, grow up with their target audience, but so that makes it easier to have a score if it does that. But even so, I really not found anything in TV where the scores grow along with characters, and he really does do that. When I was watching these shows, I was really struck by the music at the end of Rebels being really some of the best music. It sounds is definitely worthy of John Williams, worthy of all the greatest moments in Star Wars, and the emotional impact of the end of Rebels is absolutely not there without the music. Music, I think, really sells, especially Kanan's sacrifice. Not, spoilers, I suppose, when Kanan gives his life to save the rest of the main characters. But it's done well visually, I think. But the music really makes that moment. So the Clone Wars was produced under Lucas, and then when season 7, supposed to be the final season, was in development when Lucasfilm was bought by Disney and they canceled it. One of Kathleen Kennedy's, although I don't know exactly what her input on this was, one of her good decisions was to release season 7 of the Clone Wars, which came out, I guess, last year. And of course, it has its social justice inserts in there, which weren't in the original versions of season 7. But season 7, especially the last 4 episodes, fantastic if you're a Star Wars fan. The music is miles above anything. First off, in any of the other things that earlier seasons of Clone Wars or in Rebels, and miles out of anything I've ever heard in a TV show. That is, again, the entire dramatic arc there is entirely made by this sense of like absolute terror and dread, and the music lets you know, like, we all know what's coming. We've all seen episode 3. The characters don't know what's about to happen, but like it's terrifying and incredibly tense, and I've never heard anything like that in TV, and I've never seen anything in TV where the music really makes what you're watching. The season 7, though, it is a little bit more. It has its big orchestral moments for action, but it is also has a lot of kind of ambient synths in it, and apparently that was by specific direction from Lucasfilm. They wanted it to be more ambient and have more synths. They wanted specifically 70s style background synths, which he by his own admission, I guess he threw at everything he had like that once the calendar turned to 1980. But I guess his sons, who are also composers who were very into ambient synths, helped him write the score for the season 7. So very interesting. I think it's effective. It's not done in a campy way. It's done in like the most haunting moments where the orchestra drops out and we just kind of get these really cool synths. So a really good use of synths, although partially influenced by his 2 sons helping him. I'm really looking forward to his music for The Bad Batch, which is coming out on May 4th. It's kind of a sequel to Clone Wars. So really excited to see what he does with that. I just want to briefly connect it to, back to Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm. What really bothers me is that he doesn't get to use live musicians. And The Mandalorian, live musicians. Even during the pandemic, they recorded The Mandalorian with live musicians. Season 2 of The Mandalorian. Of course, generally TV doesn't use a lot of live musicians. It's mostly electronic instruments. So, that's sort of par for the course. But I think if you're Lucasfilm, there's not much excuse. You're going to give The Mandalorian a live orchestral score, and not these shows which are established, popular, and are done at such a high level, and the music being at such a high level. You're not going to give him the budget to use live orchestral musicians. I think is just really really shameful, honestly. There's no reason, in my opinion, that they can't spend a little bit of money and have some live musicians, at least on like the most important moments. It's hard to do all the music in a TV series with live orchestra these days, but none at all. I mean, you do hear like the music does suffer in its audio quality because it's just electronic instruments, and that's something I find really frustrating. And I wish Lucasfilm would value these animated shows a little bit more than I think that they're honestly more important to maintaining fan interest, then Mandalorian's great for what it is, especially as the introduction to Disney Plus. But the Clone Wars and Rebels being kind of, they're kind of the gap between the prequel trilogy and keeping people engaged in the franchise until Disney bought it. I think they really owe it to the fans to spend some more money and get some live musicians playing on those scores.
You said that they're coming out with a new series?
Yeah, The Bad Batch.
I actually never heard of that. Is that would that be animated or live action?
Yeah, animated. It's following some characters who are briefly in season 7 of the Clone Wars, and what happens to them after that. After Order 66.
Which series did you say was canceled when Disney bought it?
Season 7 of the Clone Wars was halfway through production, and when they canceled it.
Interesting. So they can't. Is there a reason why they decided to cancel it and then just make a new series, or?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what the logic behind it canceling was, because they had already released like the rough animation of most of the episodes. You can still see it, rough animated animation for season 7. And I guess they decided they needed to really wipe the slate entirely clean. That would be my best guess. Which is, again, that's also a shame, because Clone Wars, people who watch it, adults who watch it are like fanatically devoted to it. And I went in, when I started watching it, I went into it thinking like, this is going to be like a waste of my time. Like, no, I just watched the whole thing straight through, and it's really rough at the beginning, and it really grows. As far as anyone knows, I think it's mostly just in that effort to wipe away everything and start with a completely clean slate, just like they wiped away all of the expanded universe, so they had more latitude to do whatever they're going to do, and then squander it with the sequel trilogy. Yeah, it's crazy. The sequel trilogy literally, like, it takes some storyline elements from literally all of the worst parts of the EU and gets none of the good stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, I believe it. Also, like, everything is so messed up in the Star Wars universe now that I've heard a lot of talks about the great fork that may happen in the Star Wars universe, where there's this planned potential storyline where they're going to use a mechanism from the extended universe, ironically, to create an alternative universe in which the trilogy did not exist. And go ahead.
The sequel trilogy, or
sequel trilogy.
Oh,
although the device is actually the World Between Worlds, which is in the very end of Rebels, not the expanded universe.
Okay, gotcha.
What the heck? They really just, essentially admitting defeat so hard. Like, it was just so bad. We had to literally, like, have a world in our universe where that did not happen. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of hope they do that, but...
Yeah, actually, might be good, actually.
It's the best thing they can do, but it's really sad because, like, it shouldn't happen this way.
No, it really shouldn't.
It must, like, also hurt, if for those who took part in creating the story, especially the good parts, and those who acted in it, for them to essentially, be like, oh yeah, you're not part of the important story anymore because we messed up, like
just an alternate timeline.
Yeah.
Cinema cannot survive this much longer. We can't keep doing this. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
All right, news. Well, we still have data.
I'll just go first because we're already on Lucasfilm, so.
Sure.
Lucasfilm announced today that John Williams will be composing the Indiana Jones 5. I don't know if it has a title yet. I don't think they've given it an official title yet. So that's very interesting. Apparently, he's also working on the Steven Spielberg biopic. So he's got 2 films, and he's going to be turning 90 soon. I thought he was done with films. Much less big blockbusters after the tragic way to go out with The Rise of Skywalker, but clearly that's not his last word in the industry.
Good for him. That's awesome. Nathan?
Oh, yes. I'll pull up my PowerPoint. My news was, this connects to the last time I was on, which was 2 times ago. We're talking about NFTs, and I mentioned something about Atari. Actually, I'll get to that after. I have 2 pieces of news. First one, real quick, is that the Game Developers Conference is happening from July 19th to 23rd. If you don't have to attend it, they post a lot of their lectures that happen there on YouTube. Although I don't think it's all of them. I don't think you get all the events, so it's definitely worthwhile to attend. It's fully online this time around again, like last time. They cover categories like game design, game narrative, visual arts, programming, business, etc. And they feature a lot of guests from both the indie world and the AAA and everything in between. So it's really nice. And then for Atari, I said something about, last time when I was here, I was talking about NFTs, and I saw that Atari sponsored one of the NFT, a game that had NFTs in it. And I was surprised because I thought half of Atari got swallowed by some other company and the other half is essentially dead. Well, it's true that half is dead very much, but they're coming back. So here's the story. Atari was beginning to run out of money in about 2007. In 2008, a French company called Infogrames offered to buy them for $11 million, which they accepted, which is so cheap considering the legacy of this company when you think about it, how instrumental they were to the progression of games. But yeah, Infogrames is a video game holding company, so they just essentially buy other video game companies and just hope they do good, more or less. And in late 2008, that's when the acquisition went through, and Infogrames actually renamed themselves to Atari SA. I don't know what SA means, but clearly they were happy about this Atari thing. In 2013, it wasn't looking very good. So it's 5 years later, Atari and I think there are 3 Atari subsidiaries of Atari SA. I think there was multiple branches essentially, and they were about to go bankrupt, and they were seeking relief from the government, but they managed to escape bankruptcy a year later by running some casino service, so I think online casino stuff from Atari. And at this time, this mega corporation of the olden days had 10 employees among the 3 subsidiaries. So they were they're gone. They were gone. They started from square one. All they have is their name, which is not even that useful because it's useful in a way. But in reality, this is not the same company at all as the original Atari. So I started coming back with that, and now this week, this is the interesting part. Atari has set up 2 divisions. One is called Atari Gaming. One's called Atari Blockchain. So their CEO is actually stepping down to focus specifically on Atari Blockchain alone, rather than the entire company, which is interesting. So the Atari Gaming has a few roles. One, they're going to try to license out their their old games to other game studios who want to use their stuff or whatever it is, whatever other media companies would want to take whatever they have. They're dealing with doing hotel and casino things, which is strange, but I guess whatever. I don't really know too many details there. And they're working on developing free-to-play mobile games. I don't know why free-to-play specifically, but I guess the mobile game market is pretty much all it is nowadays. And according to Gamasutra, quote, revitalize classic Atari IP with an extension into the console and PC market, which sounds like they're actually going to make games again, using their existing IPs. And which you can see on the screen on the right is Atari VCS, which is a console that Atari is planning to release finally after a decade or 2 of not existing and not releasing actually it's probably over 2 decades. It's been over 2 decades, I'm pretty sure. Atari VCS, I believe, don't quote me on this though, was actually an old console. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's an old console. And then this is the newer version that's not really, it kind of looks like it in a way, and it's flat style. You can see it has a joystick, which is, absent from, modern consoles. That's kind of what sets it apart. The controller, looking at it, is pretty standard. It looks like an Xbox controller in terms of the thumbstick placement. It has D-pad, 4 buttons, pretty standard. You can't see the triggers from that image, but yeah. I don't know anything about the specs or anything. I don't know if those have been released. I didn't really do much in-depth research on that. But yeah. The release date is unknown, but it was announced in 2017 and pre-orders started in 2018. So you would think, I guess, specs are probably known at that point. That's it for Atari Gaming. As for Atari Blockchain, they concern themselves with the Atari token, which is Atari cryptocurrency that exists now. And they will be trying to figure out how to utilize that in both their games, whether it be their own or outside other games, and also with the Atari VCS. I'm not sure at all how it's going to factor in, but they seem to be going down this cryptocurrency path, as we saw with the NFT episode last time, where they were given money to they invested in some in the Sandbox, which is a NFT based game. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, so for me, real quick, I this week when I was looking at news in cinema, I found the IMDb page for movie news, which looked like this, and I thought that was kind of interesting in general, just looking at the titles. So upcoming releases we have are, let's see, we've got Top Gun Maverick, Mission Impossible, Dungeons and Dragons, an untitled Star Trek movie in 2023, another Mission Impossible movie, and some random other movie. But out of all of that, I mean, we're not seeing any not independent, that's not the right word. Original films are kind of still on the down in terms of what will be appearing in cinemas, and it's just kind of sad. But also interesting, Paramount, which is out of all the gigantic studios, is probably doing one of the worst, because a lot of media outlets will say it's because, they invest too much in art, like auteurs like Scorsese and others, when that's not their problem. Their problem is that they have no idea how to market movies. No one saw any advertisements for the movie Silence, because Paramount is incompetent when it comes to advertising in the modern world. So yeah, that's pretty much the news, is that there is no news that cinema seems to be marching on in this death march to oblivion. Not to say any of these movies are necessarily bad. It's just Dungeons and Dragons, really. Okay. We're going there, apparently. And yeah, that's it. So I guess we'll just finish off the stream before I lose data. If you appreciate all the effort that we put into these, the best thing, like I said at the beginning of the stream, is to hit the like button and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or follow if you're on Twitch, or if you're on Rumble. That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's free. Just hit the subscribe button, and we
literally do nothing.
Yeah, we're not asking for a single thing. These streams get posted every Sunday. I try my best to. It takes a lot of work to clean up these streams and clean up the audio, and it's still not where I want it to be in terms of the audio only version of the podcast, but we're getting there slowly. But the way we do that, the way I do that, is that I edit these between now and Sunday, now being Friday night. So if you want to catch these live, because you're hearing this after the fact, you got to come around our YouTube channel or our Twitch channel at 7 p.m. on Fridays. If you want to hear it right after the stream ends, for free, you can join our locals community. That's at mixedmedia.locals.com. You can also go to the link on the right of the screen to find all of our social media platforms, including our Instagram. But for free, you can see the raw stream as it was presented, uncensored. If there's something embarrassing that I cut out, you can see that too. And you can see that on mixedmedia.locals.com. It's free for now. It won't be free forever. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching. There's no one here right now, but thank you all the people in the future. Yeah, thank you to all of our hosts for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Yep. Have a good night.